just if you could talk a little bit about how you make space for these different parts, both the part that's freaking confident and has a voice, and also the part that's like, oh my goodness, what are people, whatever the nervous voice is. And thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me and having something so compelling to show up at. Yeah, I mean, these are multiple parts, and ever since I was very young, I've always known that they can be concurrently happening. So I can be really excited about something, one part's ambivalent, one part's put me in the ring, coach. The next part is I'd rather be eating bonbons and not here. So yeah, just holding space for that. And then that allows for me to hold space for that in other, too. If there's space for these parts to be sort of multitudinously happening at the same time, then there's more space for the humanity around me, too.
Yeah. And how do you see about accessing, when you look back at your kind of younger years, and there was this incredible passion and energy, and I think I looked at you because I wanted to access that. And, you know, there was like I think a lot of people are like, yeah. like there's an oomph right there. And so how do you relate to that now? Do you feel like there was a lot of hurt that you were experiencing that you're trying your best to process?
I mean, some of that is true, and art in some ways is cathartic, but it's not always healing. So some of the corrective happens in relationship versus just emoting on stage. There's certain songs, like You Want to Know, that I've sung over and over again, but there's actually a full-blown lack of resolution if I'm singularly relying on the catharsis of artistic expression. It can move the energy, but it doesn't necessarily correct or rewire my brain.
Got it. So could you talk about your own process of going from somebody who knew one aspect, you knew how to release and express?
Yes.
And then what was the shift to realizing, like, oh, there's other dimensions of my being beyond being an amazing singer-songwriter that I need to kind of get in touch with in order for real healing to happen? I'm curious if we could share a little bit. I know your healing journey's been a long journey. A little bit about what that shift has been. Yeah,
specifically around the art. I quickly saw that there was a lot going on in terms of mirror neurons, people watching me perform on stage, my sort of inadvertently giving permission for them to feel what I was feeling, the anger, the terror. Well, the three ones that we weren't allowed inside of patriarchy as women to feel were sadness, fear, and anger. So those three in particular, when I'm embodying those on stage, I can see that there is a deep sort of energetic connection with those who might be beholding. But what I had to take into account, and I've only been able to do that gracefully later in life, is that there was a temperamental conundrum in a way. It was, in some ways, and Elaine Aron talks about this around the highly sensitive person awareness. She talks about, for those of us who are high novelty seeking and very passionate and intense, it was combined in my case with introversion, and I feel like I've said this before, but I feel like a poodle inside of a black stallion's body. You know, so there's a lot of pedal break, pedal break, pedal break, and that's just kind of how it is for this particular situation. And being responsible for that. So what that might look like is take breaks, spend enough time alone, have 17 therapists going at all times. Thank you, by the way. You've saved my life more than once. So just being responsible not only for one's temperament, and that's where self-knowledge comes in as a profound act of consciousness raising. Because I used to see self-knowledge accruing as sort of an egoic pursuit. And now I see it as wildly important for us to live our purpose while being here. Not getting too mired and overly identified with the egoic identity, but letting it sort of dovetail and draft and work with who we are and how we show up in the world. So I just had to take more responsibility around that, and also the speed with which the current of life animates through us. I think it courses through us at varying speeds. In my case, it courses through really quickly and urgently, so I just have to be aware of that. And in my case, how do I shut that off? And, you know.
Beautiful. So we titled this session Wholeness versus Wellness, and I thought that might be a good place to kind of begin. How you define wellness and how you define wholeness. And a lot of people probably would think those are somewhat synonymous, and so I'd love to hear kind of what those both mean to you, and where do you think kind of the best resting place is between them?
I think sometimes wellness connotes sort of this perfectionism of a standard. You know, I'll biohack my way, I'll do the right psychotherapeutic models, you know, and there's a pursuit for a lack of wholeness. And so wholeness for me, I think of the metaphor of the freeway, these on-ramps and off-ramps everywhere, and depending upon my mood or my hormones or my sleep or lack of sleep, or you know, sometimes the way in or the portal in is through soma, through my body, bottom up. Sometimes it's through organizing, having some disorganized attachment in my past. Sometimes it's just straight organizing, cognitive charts, pulleys, levers, just really hyperstructure helps me. So also being attuned to the moment, like sometimes structure and a deadline is powerful. Sometimes having a structure and getting lost in the flow and the beautiful chaos is pure rapture. Depends on the context and what's up.
But do you feel like we are inherently all whole, and it's more about? I had a teacher of mine who said, "Your goal, the goal is not to be perfect; it's to find that within us that is perfection." The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to find that within us that is perfect. I don't know if goal is the right word.
So beautiful.
And so is that more the spirit that that if we can contact wholeness, we don't need to perfect ourselves in all these perfect bodies and perfect cold plunges and perfect biohacks. Like we can actually be who we are internally, more based on what's inherent in us versus what we do or get or acquire or fix or whatever that.
And unfolding, and for me, it's a returning to wholeness.
Got it.
And that implies what I do believe, which is that we are innately whole out of the gate, and then we pretzel and cut things off and hide things and deny things and lose entire parts of ourselves in order to fit in with our current culture. And then we spend the second half of our life dismantling that which we've done for survival reasons, totally understandable, but may not be working for us relationally or otherwise. But the unique thing about the wholeness orientation for me is that 8.1 billion people in the world, there will be 8.1 different versions of addressing or attuning to what they need to look at or want to look at. Some love the somatic route, some hate it. You know, some love answering the questionnaire on the Enneagram, some hate it. You know, to each their own.
And so how has your journey been with those different modalities? Because I think it's probably fair to say you've read and explored probably more self-help and relationships books than the average person. Would you say? Like you really have deep dives into a lot of different modalities. And I'm curious for you, not to say that certain modalities are better or worse than others, but if you're looking at all the different things you've done, how do you kind of form your own particular approach to what raises consciousness? Like, so if I'm like, okay, we all want to raise consciousness. Most of us do.
Well, not everybody.
We're all here want to raise our consciousness.
In this room, maybe.
And that's really essential. And to understand our wounds and to understand, are we coming from an open heart? Are we coming from a more wounded place? Where are you at today with like, oh, here's the things that I've discovered that, at least for me, really helped me tap into that form of healing and that form of actually openness that I want to embody?
Not surprisingly for me, it's been super multitudinous over the years, different clinical trainings or master's intensives or being under someone's wing for 10 years. So just the human condition has always been wildly fascinating to me, especially around relationality and how can we make it graceful. I have a lot of room for exploration in that from multiple models, and then my own models or my own approaches that I would just try on in small pods with working with small amounts of people. And then I would be told, oh, this is very awry, or this is very parts work, or this is very constellation therapy, narrative therapy. So I would find out later, oh, you're such an attachment parent. Oh, cool. Great.
You were just doing.
I love it.
You were just doing naturally.
A lot of it, I was doing it, and then I would. It would be elucidated that this is an approach. So, and then also, I've stood on the shoulders of giants my whole life. I have mentors and teachers and colleagues turned brothers or sisters, friends. And I love to bandy about that sort of that leading edge of this consciousness conversation because it.
And has there been one or two that, whether it's IFS or something that has there been one or two that you feel like, wow, that kind of
Resonates most.
resonates? Not that it has to resonate forever, but it's kind of been a
Yeah.
path, or has it really been a multitude of different things that's hard to name
Yes.
any?
Parts work is probably my favorite portal in. It's the one I have most experience with, I think. So Carl Jung, Sabina Spirine, developmentalism, and then it graduates into modernity. Margaret Paul was talking about a lot of parts stuff,
Yeah.
segueing into Debbie Ford,
Yeah.
and Richard Schwartz, amazing, taking it to a whole other level. And so in some ways, when I have had the privilege and pleasure of meeting those in the world, really working with the multitudinousness of parts, and it feels like a coming home, like a real,
Yeah.
it's beyond resonance. It's just a
Yeah.
big click.
And could you say what about that modality kind of like touched you? Like what about it that like goes like, ooh, yes.
Yeah, it takes human beings out of the binary, out of the extremes. It takes us into the full, rich complexity that we all are, and allows for an actual human experience.
Yeah.
You know, and allows for the feelings and the cognition and the somatic and the spiritual and the energetic, non-physical.
Yeah.
You know, it allows for all these aspects of self to be on the table.
Yeah.
So it's a very whole approach. And wholeness was a big part of Debbie's whole ethos. I'd rather be whole than good. Even though I think we're innately good.
Do you, when you think of wholeness, like, because I actually think that different people have different ways of translating spirituality or what spirituality is. And some people are like, it's actually not helpful. Am I present right now? It's more a guide. Like, am I loving right now? But
What wasn't helpful to
well, spirituality easily becomes a concept. Like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I'm so spiritual. It's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, like,
Yes.
right? Like, that's great.
Yes, you are.
That's great that you think that. But like, are we embodying it in this moment? Is more the direction. And so I'm curious how you see the spiritual. What is spirituality to you, and how do you see its role in your life, and how would you kind of define it, or is it synonymous with wholeness?
For me, I think of it triadically. So connection with spirit or God or life. If I don't have that connection fostered, or a felt sense of connection with life and all that is, ouch.
Yeah.
And then interpersonal, so supra, inter,
Yeah.
relational. If there's profound disconnections in there, ouch.
Yeah.
Intrapersonal
Yeah.
parts, self-emerging.
Yeah.
What does that even feel like? How do I know? All that inquiry, super inquiry.
Yeah.
So those are the triadic sort of considerations that I put into play, especially when there is unrest.
Yeah.
Or a sense of disconnection. Often it's all three. You know, so I just keep my eye on those beautiful prizes.
Beautiful.